Welcome to Linux Mastery, Lesson 0, where we lay out why this series exists. Most engineers know about 20% of Linux, ls, cd, sudo, maybe grep. The other 80%, file system hierarchy, processes, signals, networking, shell internals, is what actually separates juniors from seniors. And that's exactly what these 13 lessons cover. Not commands to memorize, but mental models you internalize, so you can read, etc., like a map and debug from first principles instead of digging through Stack Overflow. Picture it as an iceberg. Above the waterline, ls, cd, sudo, mkdir, apt install. Enough to follow a Stack Overflow answer, not enough to debug when that answer fails. Below it, the file system hierarchy, the process model, permissions, networking, shell internals, the mental models that make every command suddenly make sense. And that gap is career-defining. A 20% engineer spends 30 minutes Googling each incident. A 100% engineer reasons from first principles in 30 seconds. Multiply that by every outage, every deploy, it compounds. The 80% isn't on Stack Overflow. It's scattered across man pages, kernel docs, and 30 years of practice nobody wrote down. This series writes it down. Here's the map. Above the waterline, the commands you already know: ls, cd, sudo apt, grep, vim, ssh, the surface vocabulary that gets you hired. Below it, the substrate this series actually teaches: file system hierarchy, permissions, processes and signals, shell internals, the networking stack, package management, SEH and keys, text processing, scripting, systemed, find, and pipes. Each surface command rests on one of those deeper concepts. Learn the bottom row, and the top row stops being magic. Which brings us to the real fork in the road. There are two ways to know Linux. One engineer searches Linux find files modified today, copies the top answer, and prays. The other knows that find walks a tree applying tests, that time one means modified within a day, and that tests compose with, and, or, exec. 5 years in, their daily output looks identical on easy problems. On hard ones, they're 100 times apart. Rented knowledge pays interest forever. Owned knowledge pays dividends. So here's how we build that owned knowledge. 4 stages, 13 lessons. Foundations comes first. File system, permissions, processes, files, and I/O. That's where, etc. stops being noise and starts reading like a map. Operations layers on daily fluency, packages, networking, SSH. Advanced is where you compose the toolkit, shell scripting, the grep sed awk trio, systemed, and we close honest, when not to reach for Linux and what the senior practice actually looks like. Skip a stage, carry the gap forever. Walk it in order, and by lesson 12, man pages read like pros. Before we go further, let's check if you're actually in the room. 4 audiences shape this series: junior SysAdmins and DevOps, 0 to 3 years in, who can restart Nginx but stall when something breaks sideways. Full stack devs whose code runs on Linux, but who panic when SSH dies. CS students with C and algorithms, but no operational layer. And self-taught engineers, competent in their stack, but Linux still feels alien past the familiar commands. If you're a kernel hacker, close the tab. Everyone else, read honestly, pick your match. Now, how to actually use this. 2 modes. Sequential, read lessons 0 through 12 in order, 6 to 8 hours plus practice, and you come out the other side fluent end to end. Surgical. Something's broken right now, jump to the lesson that matches. Chmod confusion, runaway process, SSH key hell, log parsing, either path works. But here's the rule that makes the difference. Passive reading evaporates in a week. So after every lesson, run the commands on a real box, break something on purpose and fix it from memory. Read the man pages, then teach it to someone, or a rubber duck. Active sticks, forever. So why does this series exist at all? 3 principles. 1. Linux is the substrate, not a wrapper. Every container, every cloud VM, every Nginx process is just a thin layer over the same kernel primitives. 2. The man page is your senior colleague, written by the people who wrote the code, and engineers who actually read them debugged 10 times faster. 3. Boring fundamentals beat exciting tools. Trends cycle every 18 months. The substrate hasn't changed in 30 years. Master it once, and everything built on top finally makes sense. That's the philosophy. Here's the contract. 12 lessons, each tied to one concrete capability you didn't have before. After lesson 3, you can debug a runaway process and send the right signal. After lesson 6, you can diagnose a down site in 5 minutes. After lesson 9, no log file is opaque to you anymore. Print this table. Pin it next to your monitor. The point isn't to admire the roadmap. It's to measure yourself against it, row by row, until every line stops being aspirational. Before lesson 1, you need a Linux box you can break. 3 options. Pick the one that fits. A local VM in VirtualBox or UTM is the recommended path. Ubuntu Server 24.04, 2 gigs of RAM, costs nothing, breaks freely. A $5 cloud droplet if you want real networking and a public IP for the later lessons. Or if you already SSH into a server, use it for read-only practice only. Don't fat finger a chomsot on production. 30 to 60 minutes. Don't skip this. Once you have that sandbox, here's what kills most beginners. And none of it is technical. 5 habits. Memorizing commands without a mental model. Skipping the why for the how. Hiding in GUIs instead of the terminal. Reading about breakage instead of causing it. And comparing your 6 months to someone's 10 years. The fixes are simple, but you have to internalize them now. Models before commands. Ask why every time. Live in the terminal. Break things on purpose. And measure yourself against last week's you. Never the senior next to you. That's the intro done. You know the 80% problem, the difference between renting and owning your skills, the shape of the curriculum, and how to set up your lab. Next, we start the real work. Lesson 01, the file system hierarchy. /etc/var/usr/opt. What lives where and why. After 1 lesson, you'll read any Linux box like a map. Foundations, stage 1 of 4. The substrate begins. See you in lesson 01.